While most of the insane technology from Fallout comes in the form of robotics or large machinery, some of the most impactful can actually fit in the palm of your hand. And of the most notable of these is a parody on Spam known in the Fallout universe as Cram. This highly processed pork product can be found in a distinct blue and yellow tin, composed primarily of nothing more than water, salts, and pork byproducts and substitutes. The taste is described as especially vile, oftentimes leading to bouts of constipation and depression, and yet still becoming a staple of many dishes in the pre- and post-war era. For example, notoriously, cram burgers were created by many restaurants as a cheap alternative to traditional burgers, which were so bad that some government officials proposed banning them because they were a war crime. And speaking of war, the primary use of cram was actually seen in wartime efforts, where cans of the substance had literally an infinite shelf life. This meant that most soldiers were outfitted with small cans of cram in order to keep them fed even if they were trapped on the battlefield for weeks, where a piece of bad-tasting food would have been the least of your worries. For those of you who don't know as well, in our real lives, the cram equivalent, that being Spam, usually only has a shelf life between 2 to 5 years. Whereas in the Fallout universe, even hundreds of years later, people in the wasteland are finding unopened cram cans and eating them with no adverse effects outside of things seen in the pre-war days. Essentially, cram is acting as the perfect food, not in terms of taste and culinary mastery, but in terms of practicality. A product that can literally survive a nuclear holocaust and still provide nutrition and sustenance to any in need. Not only has this served as a vital part in keeping the post-war effort afloat, giving many wastelanders the opportunity to find a non-tainted food source, but also it just shows how advanced the Fallout technology once again was before the bombs dropped. In a lot of ways, cram is the holy grail of food products, the type of invention that would send ripples across our society as we know it. Because while we do have some products that have no shelf life, like raw honey or rice and sugar, more complex amalgamations of meats like cram always spoil, even if it's decades later. But in the Fallout universe, cram shows us that major breakthroughs must have happened, and it wasn't even just lying marketing campaigns, since the post-war era proved that everything they said about an infinite shelf life really was true. In fact, cram isn't even the only type of food like this in the Fallout universe. For example, Blamco mac and cheese, another common food we find in many of the games, also has no shelf life. Whereas in our real world, Kraft macaroni and cheese, for instance, only lasts about 2 years before things start to spoil. Other inventions like sugar bombs, Dandy Boy apples, Fancy Lad snack cads, Instamash, and even entire drink lines like Nuka-Cola also provide infinite shelf lives. Meaning food in a lot of ways is the least of the Fallout universe's concerns when it comes to nuclear Armageddon, as even before the bombs dropped, infinite food sources and infinitely lasting ones were commonplace. Or in other words, preservative technology in the Fallout universe had been perfected, a holy grail of food research that in this case at least likely saved an entire future form of humanity from extinction. McDonald's wet dream. And again, it shows how technologically adept the scientists and researchers from the Fallout universe were, not bound by any sort of regulations, which led to fast innovation but dire costs in the end. And really, I just find things like this so fascinating, because despite how fake the world of Fallout is, its parallels to our real world and real technology make you think not only about what could be possible in our future, but what potential downsides we might meet along the way as well. Only time will tell. For the final entry on my list of the craziest lost technology of Fallout, we actually are going to talk about not a singular technology or idea, but an entire facility that at one point housed thousands of secret projects and fascinating new forms of innovation before sinking deep into the Pacific Sea. Known commonly as Control Station Enclave, this megastructure at sea was built years before the Great War even came to a conclusion. Originally constructed by Poseidon Energy as a deep-sea oil rig built upon the last known source of oil in the entire region, this location has always been extremely important. But as the final days of the Great War began to close in, top brass and government officials in the United States, in cahoots with the Enclave deep state, were looking for a place to hide. Dozens of top-secret facilities and hidden bunkers were designated as new homes for these twisted leaders. And on the West Coast specifically, Poseidon Energy's massive oil rig was chosen as the headquarters, where even the president himself fled from Armageddon. For almost 200 years, even after the bombs fell, the oil rig served as the base of operations for the Enclave and their clandestine day-to-day tasks. That is until at least in 2242, when the player character from Fallout 2, known as the Chosen One, managed to overload the primary reactor at the sea base, causing a 100 kiloton thermonuclear explosion that killed everyone for miles and crippled the once almighty Enclave. But while this accomplishment is surely a mostly good thing, resulting in less ability for the Enclave to control and manipulate the wasteland, it did also mean the loss of countless forms of vital technology. For example, in late 2077, the original schematics for the XO-1 power armor and vertibirds was sent to the facility from the White Springs Congressional Bunker. Both of these blueprints could have been helpful for admirable forces in the wasteland rebuilding and trying to take America back after the bombs fell. And on top of this too, there was an unimaginable amount of research and innovation happening on this oil rig, including state-of-the-art computer systems that used multiprocessor motherboards and system arrangements controlled by hyper-intelligent AI that had never been seen before, along with the most advanced operating system the world had ever seen, all helping to run the main servers for Poseidonet, which we talked about at the very beginning of this video. Other horrifying experiments were being done here as well, including the final testing stages of FEV Curling 13, which would have been an airborne biological weapon based on the original strains of FEV that could be released into the atmosphere to purge the entire world of all remaining humans, laying the groundwork for a complete Enclave takeover and rebuilding effort. And as scary as strains of FEV like this are, or irradiated water being used for testing on human beings, things like this at the Enclave oil rig also could have potentially led to numerous breakthroughs in science and technology back on the mainland, if only the facility was left intact. It's a risky proposition for sure, trying to keep the Enclave base alive, but in a world like Fallout, where it seems all hope is lost anyways, maybe it would have been something well worth the risk. And really, potentially more than any other location in Fallout, I feel like being able to go back to Control Station Enclave to uncover what was really there would not only mean tons of helpful new things to bring back to Wastelanders, but also just a bunch of awesome and crazy lore. After all, the Enclave and their dealings with the United States government for years preceding the fall of the world are in many ways the most fascinating part of the entire Fallout timeline. The questions of what these people must have said and done, the revelations that they would have been privy to, and the psychology of how human beings can be so cruel. But now, it seems that the research and development on this oil rig 175 miles off the coast of California will forever be lost. Maybe one day though, there will be a Fallout mainline narrative about the discovery of some of the findings from the Enclave here, where we must stop a villain from using it to create a new organization that, like the Enclave or the Master's Unity, could spell the end of the world. The Automated Doctor, or Autodoc for short, might just be one of the most impressive lost technologies of the Fallout universe that most people don't even know about. You see, in the timeline we play in the games, these devices are few and far between, and those that we can find are often already broken or destroyed, requiring specialists to even repair them, of which there's almost none left. But before the bombs dropped and humanity was sent into a post-apocalyptic wasteland of survival, these interesting machines were changing life as we know it. As the name would imply, Autodocs were used primarily in place of talented physicians, invaluable aids and machines that could create placebo drugs, restore crippled limbs through surgery, and implement implants to enhance both physical and mental attributes. The original Mark I models were used during wartime efforts to help soldiers on the battlefield, where a large metal contraption could be rolled across the battlefield, which included 4 autonomous arms in conjunction with scapulas, syringes, tongs, and a multi-purpose tool as a hand. Along with this, a large CRT control panel was attached to the side which allowed operators to interface with the machine. And while these early models were considered quite archaic, they paved the way for future iterations. For example, the Mark III variants saw some much-needed improvements, like a separate diagnostic model used for scanning and research. But where things started to get really interesting is with the Mark IV and Sync models. Whereas the original variants of the Autodoc were metal doctors on wheels, these newer ones were fully stationary circular capsules, used in hospitals and research facilities that allowed for much more advanced procedures. In the Mark IV, for example, surgical tools were mounted on the ceiling of the device, which would flip on when used as a blue light circled the top of the ventilated chamber full of body operations that could be carried out in minutes. And this allowed for advanced surgeries on dying individuals under extreme duress, which likely saved countless lives. I mean, honestly, imagine simply walking into your doctor's office, stepping onto a small cylindrical tube, and in minutes being cured of any ailment you can think of, no checkup needed, no long wait, and instant gratification. In a lot of ways, it was a modern marvel of technological achievement, and shows just how advanced the pre-war era of the Fallout universe really was, full of devices and machines that would put even the cutting edge of our modern day to shame. But far and away the most advanced version of the Autodoc was a variant created by Dr. Mobius in the Sync location in Big MT. For those of you who don't know, Big MT, otherwise known as the Big Mountain Research and Development Center, was a pre-war defense contractor location that was used for top-secret and advanced research into cutting-edge tech, including artificial intelligence, brain and consciousness transfer, and as we've already mentioned, advanced autodocs. The versions of the mechanical doctor here were much more interesting, with the ability to alter patients' entire skeletal structures with minimal scarring, changing people's entire appearance in mere hours, likely put to great use in espionage against China, but even more horrifying was how these autodocs could change someone's personality as well. Through the use of extreme psychological counseling and body fluid manipulation, these devices were capable of literally changing the genetic makeup of the individual, altering their personality into whatever they saw fit, used for either good or nefarious reasons. In certain cases, like Christian Royce from the Old World Blues DLC for Fallout New Vegas, we even get to see an example of the downsides of this tech, where we see that she has completely lost her voice due to being inside the Autodoc while it malfunctioned. These were machines that were on the verge of the unknown in Fallout terms, contraptions that could literally alter humanity as we know it, even post-birth, and many people didn't even know the extent to which how powerful they were. The possibilities for using autodocs for good and evil here are practically endless, and it goes to show that even if the bombs never fell in Fallout lore, there certainly was so many other things that would have led to absolute disaster. A world that may be stuck in the 1950s, but much of its technology seems so far away even for us. But it also really goes to show just how awesome and intriguing the Fallout universe can be too, asking us questions about not only ourselves, but humanity as a whole, and whether we are ready for the possibility of things like robots that operate on our bodies independent of human intervention. In fact, at Big MT, many of the autodocs were also retrofitted with synthetic personalities, which would talk with patients and in some reports even become their friends, leading to a sense of trust that was likely misguided. Even babies during the pre-war era in delivery clients were often subjugated to what were known as My First Infirmary, a child-friendly variant of early model autodocs. It's a terrifying reflection of what will likely soon be our modern day, and once again shows that the terror of Fallout might not be that far away for any of us, even in our modern world. Do you know what I'm most afraid of in the Fallout universe? It's not radiation, bandits, or even the ghouls. No, it's the FEV mutated hyper-intelligent raccoon armies that do calculus in their heads. Yes, I'm serious. Because you see, one of the craziest things about the Fallout universe, a world that already has so many insane things, are all the talking and smart animals, and the technology behind their creation. But before we dive into genius raccoons, the most famous of these has to be the intelligent Deathclaws, which originally were created in top-secret facilities where the Enclave injected them with high doses of FEV, which led to boosted intelligence and, strangely enough, the ability to talk. These talking Deathclaws even at one point stormed Vault 13 and kidnapped the Enclave slavers, after which they took a more diplomatic approach and allowed nearby humans to come under their protection. Stories have been told of long talks at night between human and beast, trying to come to understandings between their kind. But as would be expected, this truce of sorts eventually came to an end, when the Enclave managed to wipe out the Deathclaws, who hadn't been able to fully craft new computer systems that would let them use their razor-sharp claws. And really, it's just crazy to imagine a giant 9-foot monster trying to use a Pip-Boy like a human being while sipping on some coffee talking with the locals. And yet, that's exactly what happened. And Deathclaws aren't the only example of this happening either, as there are countless instances of experiments being done that resulted in hyper-intelligent beings who came from nothing more than primitive animals. For example, those raccoons I mentioned earlier were actually cut content from the original Fallout game, where a group known as the Slanter would have been a raccoon race and army which originally escaped from confinement, which was doing FEV experimentation. These raccoons would have had a deep hatred for humanity and keen eye for technological use, but their final implementation was shot down by Tim Kaine, who felt their wacky nature and style didn't fit the artistic integrity of the title, which is saying a lot for a game series with talking cows. Because yes, Fallout 1 did actually have talking cows, or Brahmin in this case, which also had been affected by FEV, which gave them the ability to speak and reason. And if you haven't picked up on it yet, the main culprit for all these strange talking animals is the forced evolutionary virus, something we will be talking about coming up on this video, but for now, you simply need to know it was a virus that can make dumb animals smart. Other examples of this can be found all over the series too. For instance, in Fallout 2, we can come into contact with the Renewal, a gang of ghouls and rejects that was founded by a literal mole rat that had survived an especially large dose of FEV. This rat, calling himself the Brain, led the organization on a crusade to try and take over the world, which led to countless deaths and destruction in its wake. But even more peculiar, some of these smart forms of life didn't even spawn from just FEV, but other forms of technology as well. In Fallout 2, we come into contact with a character simply known as the Scientist, and if we snoop around his laboratory some, we encounter some truly otherworldly things. In the corner of one room, for example, is a literal chess-playing scorpion, which can only be beaten with an intellect of 10 or higher in game, meaning most players have to sit and watch as a scorpion makes them feel like an idiot, a sad existence for sure. Even more astounding though is Seymour, another of this scientist's experiments, which is a talking spore plant that loves to study philosophy and debate topics. Most horrifying of all though is what Seymour is hiding. Knowing that if the professor were to ever fully understand the extent of just how smart he is, he would kill him, Seymour has been hiding his massive gains in intelligence for years, playing coy and dumb in order to remain alive, waiting for something. Potentially, Seymour could even be much more sinister than he lets on, and is simply biding his time until he is given a chance to break free from his chains and lead an army of plants in a rebellion against their caretakers. And even if this isn't the case, just the fact that there are actual plants in the Fallout universe so smart they can lie, or scorpions so intelligent they can beat geniuses in chess, shows that every single being we come across in the games should be treated with care, lest they come back to haunt us as hyper-intelligent raccoons and plant armies. And yet again, it's a perfect example of just how wacky and zany the Fallout universe can get, and how much strange technology we don't have a full understanding of is still out there. Because presumably, if experiments like this are going on after the bombs have fallen, then the pre-war era must have been full of animals and plants with forms of intelligence that are unimaginable. Maybe Fallout 5 will even let us play as a talking giraffe with a grenade launcher. Feel free to use that idea, Bethesda. If you haven't dived deeply into Fallout lore before, you probably think things like this or this are the result of massive amounts of radiation being poured onto Earth in a nuclear Armageddon. But actually, monsters like these come from something even more sinister, a virus created in a lab years before the bombs even fell that is yet another reminder that sometimes we can push technology too far. Originally referred to as the Pan-Immunity Virion Project, this secret research effort contracted to West Tech by the United States government was created as a sort of preventative measure against Chinese bioweapons. You see, in Fallout in the 2050s, civilians were ravaged by what was called the New Plague, an infection and socially transmitted super disease which took countless lives around the world. Some original Fallout documentation even suggested that the original plan of the lore behind this new plague was to put China at the center of the outbreak. But technically speaking, in modern Fallout titles, there is no actual indication this is the real truth now. Regardless though, the new plague spooked many government officials, and with rising war efforts, the Pan-Immunity Virion Project was started in 2073 as a means of preventing similar outbreaks should China choose to do the unthinkable during wartime. Early adaptations and experiments of this vaccine of sorts showed great potential, able to grant effective immunity to genetic damage and a shield for protein synthesis through the use of new quad-helix DNA structures created by the Pan-Immunity Virion. In essence, this super vaccine was showing signs it would be a great use case for general protection against almost all viruses and pathogens. But many scientists also were starting to notice drawbacks in the small mammals they were testing on. For example, side effects included increased muscle mass and ultra-fast cell regeneration, along with mood swings and subtle personality alterations. These side effects, though, caught the attention of West Tech's military liaison, Major Barnett, who took over the project and ordered further experimentation into the side effects and where they could go, with the intention of hopefully creating super soldiers for the war effort. And lo and behold, that's almost exactly what happened. Shortly after the study into the Pan-Immunity Virion's mutagenic properties, the famous FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, was born. This artificially created ball of death, unlike the Pan-Immunity efforts, was purely made for biological war efforts, allowing users to literally alter the genotype and phenotype of hosts, creating things like the famous super mutants we see in-game, which usually are dumb and strong, but depending on the strain of FEV, can even be quite intelligent and resourceful. And speaking of strains, FEV has had countless. In New California, for instance, the Master and his army known as the Unity from Fallout 1 used the FEV2 strains, which were the pinnacle of war research that created ultra-fast and capable human-killing machines that could take over the world. Other strands like the EEP variant were used in places like Vault 87, where skin pigmentation would mold into a dangerous yellow-green mix, while the thickness of the skull became more evident, protecting against radiation, while all sexual organs atrophied away. This is just one instance of what were likely hundreds of different strains of FEV being used before and after the war on unsuspecting human or animal victims, which turned these helpless creatures into something new entirely, much more aggressive, fearsome, and tragic. In fact, most of the worst creatures we encounter in the Fallout series aren't actually spawned from the hands of, say, radiation, but rather fringe FEV strains used in testing that have created Cthulhian horrors the likes of which only existed in nightmares before. And it's crazy to think that the origins for something so evil and twisted actually came from good intentions, trying to forge vaccines that would protect even against the worst ailments. And it goes to show how rich the Fallout lore and history really is, with entire decades of interesting storytelling being lost to things like the New Plague, or all the horrific experimentation that was going on long before the Great War even broke out. Contagions and viruses like these too are some of the scariest technology out there, meddling with power that humanity doesn't fully yet understand to try and change the genetic makeup of that which makes us human in the first place. And now that the most original documentation and study of FEV and the Pan-Immunity Virion is lost, it's scary to wonder about what these new strains in the wasteland being uncovered are actually doing. Likely crafting some truly unbelievable biological weapons which could transform every living being into a genetic monstrosity with no desire other than to kill. One of the most fascinating parts about the Fallout universe is just how analogous it is to our very own, while at the same time being so different. And maybe the best example of this are computers. Primarily built from vacuum tubes rather than transistors and microchips, Fallout machinery tends to be a lot more bulky and inefficient than our modern-day counterparts. And this difference is one of the main catalysts for what is known as the Divergence, the period of time after World War II where the Fallout universe starts to change greatly from being in tandem with our real-life timeline. However, along with this slowdown of computing evolution also came more primitive versions of communication networks and the internet that gave rise to questions about some vital lost technology in the wasteland. For those of you who don't know, the precursor to the internet in our real lives was WANs or wide area networks, which served a similar purpose to LANs or local area networks of connecting multiple devices with one another over increasingly large distances and complexities. WANs specifically span much larger geographical areas than LANs and were being used by governments and institutions as early as the 1950s. These networks allowed for sending messages or emails between one another, as well as system monitoring and control, most famously, for example, ARPANET, a massive WAN used by the US government for military operations that served as the main catalyst for the birth of the internet as we know it today, which now spans the entire globe. So why does this all matter in Fallout then, though? Well, in Fallout, there seems to be no internet at all either before or after the Great War. Yet still, it's clear from all the messages we find in terminals in every game that many people across multiple states and companies are all communicating with one another somehow. For example, in Fallout New Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC, inside the Zion Ranger Station building, we can find terminals connected to what is called the Zion National Park Network, along with emails to shipment companies in faraway locations. In Fallout 1, we discover Vault-Tec's proprietary WAN network known as the Interweb, and the Institute's central network from Fallout 4 is a vital piece of tech used by the Institute to spy on the wasteland and conduct advanced experiments. So as far as we can tell, it seems that the Fallout universe is stuck at the level of tech we saw around ARPANET in the 1950s, where rather than the entire world being connected, different parts of the United States were using WANs to transmit data and information. In Fallout, on the West Coast, these networks were much more primitive and useless, with very little throughput on the networks of computers housing less than 16 kilobytes of RAM. The East Coast fared much better, with portable electronics like advanced Pip-Boys that were more powerful than entire computers on the West. But regardless, most WAN networks across the continental United States simply connected one state to its neighbors or small university campuses to enterprise buildings. However, there was one WAN that was not only extremely influential for its time and in the modern Fallout timelines as well, but may just be holding some insane secrets. And this brings us to one of the most important lost companies in Fallout history, that during its heyday served as the largest energy producer in the United States, a clandestine arm of the government, Poseidon Energy. In Fallout 2, we learn about a top-secret program between the United States government and Poseidon to construct a massive network across the United States to give troops and logistical networks an advantage over China in the East. Called Poseidonet, this WAN was the backbone of the military-industrial complex during wartime, and provided massive increases of bandwidth for users that allowed for things like downloading and uploading robotic routine codes, advanced security traces for unauthorized users, and even real-time video conferencing like we see Talking with House in New Vegas. And these aren't just small upgrades or fun additions. These are massive infrastructural changes that put Poseidonet much closer in line with late-stage ARPANET or even early renditions of the World Wide Web than anything else we see in Fallout. And it makes you start to wonder just how advanced Poseidonet and WANs had become before the bombs started dropping. For example, in Fallout 2, when making the discovery about Poseidon Energy and their dealings with the US government to create Poseidonet, we also learned that this network was being used at NORAD, Vault-Tec facilities, the Enclave's main base of operations, and even the Strategic Air Command looked over by the Department of Defense. Top US government officials and generals would communicate daily across the entire United States, from east to west coast, not just between states. And there were even some potential hints that this communication network may have extended all the way into the Chinese mainland as well, allowing for instantaneous war analysis for the United States back home. But with all of this advanced usage, Poseidonet is starting to sound more like the internet we know and love today. So how on earth could something so advanced compared to what was commercially available at the time in the Fallout universe exist? Well, as anyone who has played the games or watched the show knows, governments and corporations in the Fallout universe are anything but forthcoming, and tend to work ruthlessly in the shadows trying to conceal as much of their nefarious work as possible. We know Vault-Tec went into human experimentation, food companies poisoned their people for fun and laced mac and cheese, and technology companies like Robco designed killer robots that slaughtered millions of people. So it's not that far-fetched to assume a company in cahoots with the government, like Poseidon Energy, would hide the fact that they have created the most advanced wide area network of all time. After all, this would serve as a massive strategic advantage in the war against China, and keeping it a secret would obviously be a top priority for the United States government. On top of this, we know that after the bombs fell, groups like the Enclave used Poseidonet for years to communicate and plan operations, which is one of the main reasons they are so powerful and effective, especially in Fallout 2. And also, it leads to maybe one of the funniest moments in Fallout history, where in Fallout 2, you can hack into Poseidonet and come into contact with an especially pissed off Enclave member.
President of the United fucking States of America. Who do you think I was talking about? The fuck? Who is it? What? I should kick your fucking ass. Who is this?
Besides foul-mouthed super soldiers though, even in the modern Fallout games, in some quests, like in Fallout New Vegas, we can activate orbital assets like the Archimedes 2 at the Helios 1 facility or communicate with satellites in space using Poseidonet as well. And it goes to show that this lost technology for most could prove to be a vital building block for the wasteland in the future. Maybe one day the common people of the wasteland will be able to tap into the power of this massive wide area network and use it to help rebuild America and the world once and for all. Regardless though, while other technologies coming up on this list are much wackier or crazy, I think that something as simple as the foundations of the internet being hidden from the people of the world goes to show just how backwards the Fallout universe became during wartime and even before. And also just how far the corporations and scientists of this universe will go towards their own goals.